My name is Dr. Negar Shekarabi. I'm a staff psychologist at UC Irvine's Counseling Center and the outreach coordinator there, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Carolyn O'Keefe. I'm also a staff psychologist at UC Irvine, and I am the advisor for our LGBTQ mentoring program, among many other hats that we all wear.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Milo Dodson, and I'm a Post-Doctoral Fellow at UC Irvine. I was also the supervisor when I was an intern at the Counseling Center 2 years ago for the Peer Educators Program.
Hello, my name is Jessica Ortega, and I'm one of the staff psychologists at the Counseling Center at UC Irvine. I'm also the coordinator and supervisor for one of our peer programs called Coach, and we'll talk about that today.
So I'm going to start us off today when we saw that there was an opportunity here at the conference to talk a little bit more about our outreach programming. I think a lot of us at the Counseling Center got excited to have an opportunity to talk about not just the multitude of different types of outreach programming that we do, but also an opportunity to talk about the ways in which our outreach programs, because they're so integrated into our clinical services, in our mind, have an impact and effect on our clinical numbers as well. And so we want to highlight some of our really key programs for you today, but also talk about how these programs fit within the broader vision of how we look at outreach at UCI as a piece of the clinical services that we provide that's really essential to meeting the overall goals of the Counseling Center. So this is sort of, as the chair of the outreach committee, something that our committee has started to put together, which is the vision of outreach for the UC Irvine Counseling Center. It includes, the mission to provide mental health and wellness-related programming that's focused on developmental and educational needs for undergrads and grads. But it also meets the greater mission of the Counseling Center to enhance primary prevention, stigma reduction, and suicide prevention. It also encompasses not just traditional outreach as well in our vision. So we're thinking a lot about outreach, yes, traditionally workshops, trainings, but also peer programming and visibility and intercampus connectedness and collaboration and social media and all of these types of things as a part of our outreach efforts. Knowing that a lot of our very diverse student population is very likely never going to access traditional clinical services. So figuring out how to get their needs met when traditional counseling is not really something they're ever going to really engage in. So one of the things we often talk about at UC Irvine is how we have 3 pillars at the Counseling Center. So there's the clinical pillar, the training pillar, which is our training program and our internship and postdocs program, but also that outreach is an integral part, a piece of our services that keeps sort of the Counseling Center boat afloat, so to speak. One of the ways we reinforce that at our Counseling Center is we function in committees, and so there's a training committee, a clinical services committee, and an outreach committee, and staff are really divided fairly evenly among these committees to do the work of that committee and keep these 3 pillars going, and also to contribute across committees to maintaining the Counseling Center mission in our respective ways. And then this is just sort of a way to illustratively to think about the different things that outreach really encompasses. So there is, traditional workshops, presentations, and trainings, but that's really just one piece of outreach, and though it's very often the more visible piece. Consultation and collaboration that's happening a lot is still a form of outreach, particularly when it's consultation outside of the Counseling Center, collaboration with other departments and student groups. Liaisonships. So we have a lot of liaisonships all over campus to different housing units, but also to different particular student groups or groups of interest or departments where we want to have a special relationship with the students that use that department more readily. Social media and marketing, I think it's been maybe 2 or 3 years that we've really started to focus in a lot more on our social media efforts and how can we get a lot of our messaging out that way. Where students already are and where students like to access information in the first place. social justice and campus climate. So I think when we talk more specifically about some of our peer programs, you're going to see how a lot of the peer programming that we do has a social justice theme underlying sort of its framework. And then relationship building and visibility. So I'm going to have Milo start out by specifically talking a little bit more about one of these programs, which is the peer education program at UCI.
All right. So I wanted to be able to just highlight the work that I was doing as a supervisor for the peer educator program when I was an intern. I think that really collaborates with both the outreach that we do as a counseling center and then also with the training component. It provided me an opportunity to provide some supervision to the undergrads doing the work. So one of the description for the peer educator program, really being able to provide experiential educational workshops from a peer-to-peer level, and I think that's really one of the strengths for the program. Being able to have a peer engage another peer in a way that I, as a staff member, even as a trainee, I'm not able to connect in that sort of fashion, that sort of manner, as a peer can to each other. Some sort of limitation, I think, recognizing that a lot of the presentations, a lot of the workshops are more of a one-off, they're more of a one-shot opportunity that the students are able to engage in just that one time. We also have a workshop series called Friends Helping Friends, and the students are able to get a certain certificate if they go to a series of those as opposed to just one time going to one workshop. I'm gonna highlight and more later about that. I think I also wanted to just get into talking a little bit more specifically about the structure of the program. So being able to have peers provide these services, I think we look to them as almost junior staff. We give them a lot of responsibility. We give them a lot of opportunity to grow. And like I said, they're able to provide these resources for their peers in a way that we as staff really aren't able to. So everything from teaching skills, talking about life experiences, everything about healthy relationships, being able to discuss conflict resolution as well as some more heavier topics, talking about depression and suicide prevention. They also operate and serve in a really fun way for us. They do a lot of the marketing, a lot of the advertising in a way that connects with their peers in a more engaging type of way, a more fun way, I think. I think there's also the opportunity to assess student need regarding mental health issues, and then also providing stress management, relaxation training. So they're out there helping us with everything from National Depression Screening Day to giving stress balls, throwing stress balls at students as they walk by, those sorts of really kind of fun things. And they also have, the peers have a structure so that there's 14 or 15 of them, and then there's also 3 coordinators, so there's different layers of supervision built into the program. So the 3 coordinators gain that experience. I, as a trainee, gain that experience to supervise all 18 of them. And then, obviously, not being licensed, I have a supervisor myself, so a lot of different layers there. I talked a little bit about Friends Helping Friends already, but it's kind of a series of seminars really built in to cover a wide variety of topics. And then this is more specific. The students who attend 5 are able to receive a different sort of award and certificate at a ceremony at the end of the year. And it's really kind of a fun pizza party type atmosphere. And just to break down, again, you had last year when I was not the direct supervisor, but from 2014 to 2015, there were 14 peer educators, 3 peer coords, and then throughout the year there were 32 psychoeducational workshops. And you can see we reached a pretty good amount of students, well over 300 there. So really happy about all those efforts.
I have a question.
Did the peer educators lead the Friends Helping Friends seminars, or were those led by staff?
No, so those are primarily and only led by the peer educators. So I think myself and then Dr. Manessi, who is a supervisor, they're able to attend and kind of lend emotional support and encouragement. But in terms of the programming and the psychoeducational piece, that is led primarily by the peers themselves.
But staff attend.
They're invited to attend, and I think at some time, one point or another, you can see several staff there, but that's, again, led primarily by the students.
Is there always a supervisor in attendance? Or sometimes do they do them on their own?
Sometimes I think they do them on their own.
So sometimes they're flying solo. They come by the counseling center, they pick up the stuff that they need, they go to the location, they run the whole workshop, come back.
And that the series happens during the spring quarter. So they have the fall and the winter quarters for training opportunities, and during the classes, they're actually able to give mock or kind of run-throughs of what you would expect in a Friends Helping Friends workshop. So part of the reason why they're able to do it on their own is because we've seen their work in the first 2 quarters. This isn't something you're going to be doing like during the fall quarter, because that's not, we have to see where they're at developmentally, and then once we get them there to a certain level, then that's when we let the little birdies fly free. So.
Yeah.
What are some of the topics in the seminars and how long do they last?
The seminars last for, I believe, an hour. Everything, like I said, from healthy relationships to being able to conflict resolution, assertive communication, like I said, heavier topics, suicide prevention, warning signs for peers. So really, really wide, rich variety there.
In terms of overall outreach coordination then of the center, because the peer educators have this menu of trainings that they're trained to facilitate, what it helps us with as a center is as requests come in, if they fit what the peer educators are trained to do, we can funnel some of those requests into Friends Helping Friends, or the peers go out and actually do the workshops that get requested of us for us if the topics match up. So this 32 psychoeducational workshops, only 12 of them are Friends Helping Friends. The rest were by request presentations that they did that came to the counseling center as an outreach request that typically staff would have had to do. So they are immensely helpful in terms of helping us keep a really robust outreach program going without draining staff time to the degree that we would if we didn't have them.
Staff in school at large, anybody, any department, program, say we like to have discuss what.
Absolutely, yeah. With the peers, we tend to see more students want to have peers come out to them, but they will present to staff and anyone.
How are they recruited? How are the peers recruited, or who they tend to be?
I think they tend to be students in a particular major psychological, PSB?
Psychology and social behavior.
Yeah, there we go. Just
Psych
all these
majors.
acronyms, yeah. So basically, psych majors apply, and it's actually a pretty intensive application process. So you have the initial paper application that they turn in. They're reviewed, and then some students are offered interviews. It's a full interview day. So you have individual interviews, then you have group interviews. They have to actually engage in activity where there's some more on-the-spot team-building exercises, and then that process is reviewed by that year's current peers, and then they do kind of like a point-ordered ranking system, which the cords kind of oversee, as well as the current intern, and then Dr. Manessi has kind of like the final say, the wrap-up of it all. So it's a pretty intensive application process. So.
Both of our coach program and our peer educator program as well, that particular major on our campus requires a certain number of, I'm not sure what they call them, internship hours, or
Like a field study.
like a field study hours. And so both of those programs count toward those field study hours they're actually getting credit for the classes, and they're getting field study credit.
Milo's going to transition to talking about a couple other outreach programs.
So, again, during my year of internship, I think coming in with some experience at my graduate program, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, out there I was able to create a Black men support group different name, but same kind of concept, same sort of idea. So during internship, one of the opportunities I had was to create a similar group for the black men at Irvine. And I decided to title the group Wabruda, which is Swahili for brotherhood. So it's more of a drop-in type basis. I think we tend to meet on a monthly basis and have a variety of topics, but we again have about 5 to 8 students on a regular basis. One of the first meetings that we had, one of the first activities was allowing the students to create a mission statement for the group. I think that was, there were 2 purposes there. One, to define a sort of identity for the group, but then to also give them a sense of direction and sense of purpose and ownership for the group. And being able to create that on their own, and me just kind of playing in the background, having more of a facilitative interaction with them was really powerful for them. So they were talking about everything from camaraderie for each other, but then also actually advocating for an increase in the positive image of black men in society and reinforcing that, recognizing that the positive image is already out there. It's not something that they needed to create on their own, but just to kind of give a counter narrative to what we see, unfortunately, perpetuated in the media all too often. Another group is called What's Going On. This particular group runs quarterly, just historically happens to be during week 5 of each quarter. So you have about 3 times each year that we meet, really being able to cover a wide variety of topics. So whatever the pulse is, whatever the topic of conversation is, bless you, for the students during that particular quarter, we're able to go into depth. About an hour and a half discussion. We start off with a poem, Standing in the River, created by Dr. Wade Nobles. And for me, part of the reason I wanted to stick with that history is because the poem calls for more of an intergenerational type alliance to build towards increasing community in the black community. I think it's important to highlight that because whether or not I myself as a young man am able to facilitate this group, if we have older folks and more cultural elders there to facilitate, it's important to recognize the different lived experiences within the black community and to be able to have those dialogues. And again, just different size, those meetings tend to be between 30 to 50 students, both men and women. It's really powerful to have the community come together that way.
This is really crucial on our campus when you think about geographically where we're located, you know, in the heart of Orange County, and black African American students is actually the smallest population demographic on our campus. So, you know, kind of in keeping with the theme of this presentation, you know, Milo's efforts and some of the other folks on campus's efforts to reach out to this community on our campus has been so important, especially when we see what's been happening nationally with the Black Lives Matter movement. But even before that came about, we were having some incidences on campus that we really needed to reach out to this community in particular and provide a lot of support. And these are folks that aren't going to come through the counseling center doors, you know, so it's so important that the work that Milo does, it's very crucial.
Can you say how many people facilitate this group and why it's not run more than once a quarter? Like, is there a reason that it's not happening monthly or?
Sure. So in terms of how many people facilitate, it's myself and then a licensed psychologist. When I was an intern last year as well as this year, not being licensed, just wanting to have some sort of oversight that way. During my internship year, sadly enough, I was the only African American on staff. So it was good for me as a trainee to be able to get supervision from our assistant vice chancellor. So she was able to come to meetings with me.
She's a licensed psychologist.
Yeah, sorry. As a disclaimer there. Right. So she was able to come in, check in, kind of provide that extra support. And then in terms of the frequency of meetings. Historically and traditionally, I think it's been on a quarterly basis to kind of have this larger summit type feel. I think if you have it on a monthly basis, that could obviously have its own advantages, but to limit it to being once a quarter almost raises the stakes each time that we meet, to be able to have like a mini conference, a mini summit, and a check-in for the Black community at Irvine. Particularly when there's, an instance like once a quarter, you're able to kind of rally, able to come together to talk about, well, this instance of blackface, what are we going to do about that? Lack of indictment in Ferguson, what are we going to do about that? So every time there's a world event, every time there's an event on a national scale, or in our backyard in Irvine, we're able to really come together as a community, like I said, on a monthly basis, or a quarterly basis, I'm sorry.
All right, I'm up. Thank you, Milo.
Yes.
So again, my name is Jessica, and I coordinate the COACH program. It stands for Creating Options and Conquering Hurdles. Those of you that were in the peer program meetup, I was talking a little bit about this. This program actually started, it's probably going on a couple decades, but it actually started out as a program that was called the Women's Peers. And one of our dear colleagues who's retired, she transformed it and really shifted it towards a life coaching model. She was a social worker, a clinical social worker. They really wanted to work with some of the students, some of our underrepresented students, especially those experiencing academic difficulty. And so there was a group of them that collaborated, and actually Dr. Thomas Parham, who's our Vice Chancellor, was in on some of this inception. And they really wanted to help those students that were on academic probation, subject to dismissal. And a lot of these students were coming out of this particular office, the Undecided Undeclared Office, which is within the undergraduate education department. And it was a way to help kind of strengthen some of their already current protective factors, but also some other risk factors that could be at play. A lot of our students were first generation, didn't know how to navigate the system. There could be other factors that were going on in terms of cultural isolation, feeling alienated, some other systemic concerns that we were having for them. And so oftentimes too, they were the first years. So imagine being first generation, first year, and some other cultural layers that we wanted to speak to and give them more of a one-on-one experience with a peer. And so I have every year 15 what we call coaches, so they're peer life coaches, and they're giving one-to-one life coaching sessions. And so it does take some extensive time from myself as a coordinator, just because there has to be a lot of oversight of this, because they're having one-on-one sessions, right? So I'm not in the room with all of them. It's impossible to do that. They see a lot of students. They'll have what we call like a caseload of 5 to 6 students at a given time. So multiply that by 15, that's a lot of students they're seeing. And then they do weekly sessions, sometimes bi-weekly, but they're doing weekly sessions. They don't have a cap on, oh, this is how many sessions you have. They're really motivational in nature. This is why the program was set up this way. They're trying to empower them. But what we do is we talk a lot about the difference between counseling and coaching, because a lot of our students are coming from the psychology majors, so they're excited. But we spend a lot of the fall, all of fall is major training. We have a class that's 3 hours long, 2 to 5 every Wednesday, every week of the quarter, even including finals week. So we're doing a lot of training, a range of issues. So we talk a little bit about crisis intervention for them. It's really tailored to them. They need to know warning signs. Much like what we do maybe with RAs, right, resident advisors, we're talking about crisis intervention, how do you consult, how do you refer? We talk about those resources. They know our psychologists, they're working within the counseling center. That's their hub, and they know they're ambassadors to the counseling center, and so they take their roles very seriously. They have to have access to me a lot, so if they're ever concerned, they need to contact me. There's a lot of supervision that's kind of happening. We also do group supervision that's embedded in the class time, and so this is where I have a pre-doctoral intern joining me, and so he or she has that opportunity to get some supervision experience. So I'm also meeting with that intern outside that class time, and then they're usually a part of the group supervision, so we'll split the class like 8 and 7. And then my pre-doctoral intern will actually facilitate some group supervision with those peers so they can talk with each other, give each other ideas for interventions, but also making sure that they're staying on point with what coaching is. They're developing concrete goals. What are the outcomes? How do we know you're done? Those kind of things. We get referrals from that same department where they're on academic probation or at risk for that. I get these referrals starting in the winter quarter. My referral sources know that they're going to be good to go by winter, so I don't get any of these referrals in the fall when they're in the midst of training. But we get a lot of referrals. Kind of moving forward a little bit, in terms of the numbers, I'll have like a referral directory. I manage the directory, so I get all the referrals coming from my colleagues from that office. And sometimes I say they come off the streets, like they're coming in, they heard about it on campus, and so I need to contact all of them to make sure that they're appropriate for our services. A few times there's times where I need to make sure that they're being seen probably at the counseling center, and maybe that resource is more appropriate. So I kind of need to know who's coming through the door to make sure that's an appropriate fit. And so in terms of the numbers, this past year, they saw 111 students across the 15 of them. That includes actually my TAs. I have teaching assistants. This past year, I was blessed to have 4, which is really weird. That's a lot. But it helped out because actually a few of them still wanted to provide coaching services, so they helped augment some of the demand. And 736 sessions, so they saw a lot of students, but they saw them really regularly. So if they picked up in the winter, some of them started in January and they continued with them. However, we also talked about closure. If they've achieved their goals, how can you help them with other resources to kind of transition? So once they would close with one, they would pick up another. And so that's why the numbers look like, whoa, there's like 736. Well, it's because they're seeing them weekly and they're picking up new people. They're really good about knowing their campus resources. I think that's the highlight of peer programs. They know exactly how the campus works. They're helping them navigate really their identities. And a lot of the pieces here in terms of the vulnerable populations, I would say the largest proportion of our students seeking services are first-generation college students still. And so oftentimes I'll ask from the referral source, do you have a little bit of background information before I contact the student? What is their particular needs? If I can try to do a match, let's say they're a transfer student. I sometimes have coaches that are transfer students, and I try to make a match as much as possible. If they would like to code switch, would they like to use their native tongue once in a while? Maybe it's not monolingual in the session, but it's just they want to be able to use that word to express themselves. I have some coaches that tell me I feel comfortable, like in Mandarin, I feel comfortable with Spanish in terms of code switching, or if they want to say a word here and there. You know, I try to make that match as much as possible. So that's a little bit about the coach. Yes.
Are
Yeah.
your one-on-one sessions in the counseling center, or are they in the
Yes. So they're in the counseling center, which is really hard because I know we're very stuff in there. What I teach them, all first sessions are mandatory, have to happen in there because you don't know what they're bringing to the table. More often than not, they're going to be in there. However, what if it's a student that's strictly, we're talking time management, prioritizing, it's very focused like that. They're not bringing up anything in terms of identity or feeling isolated or anything more personal. We have some areas on campus the students inform me about that are appropriate, so they can have study rooms or things like that on campus. But I say no Starbucks, none of this stuff where you're going to probably be interrupted. So we talk about the parameters and the boundaries of their roles. But more often than not, they're there navigating. I mean, they're always, and they have to do session notes. Some more details is they actually have to document what happened. But it's not like our soap notes. It's more, what went well, what happened in the session, what is your plan for next time, what do we need to work on, and then they bring it to supervision. So I do the biweekly supervision. I have the pre-doctoral intern. They usually get about 4 of the 15 coaches, thus I supervise the other 11. And then it's biweekly throughout winter to spring quarter. So January to June, I'm doing that in terms of supervision. So hopefully that answers your question.
Any other questions about Coach? Because now Jessica's going to transition to talk about a couple other programs she's involved in with all of her extra time after Coach.
So Estamos Unidas. This is like my baby. I love this one too. I mean, we do things that we love, right? So I love this. I've been running this particular group for the last decade now, and I'm really excited. Actually, when I took this over in 2005, it was Estamos Unidos, so it was more inclusive across, those that self-identified as male or female, anywhere on that continuum. However, we were noticing mostly our women are coming, our Latinas were coming. So I went to the group. We talked about possibly just making this a group for the women, the Latinas on campus, and that's what we did. And I asked them even if you want to change the title, the name of the group. They said, "Oh, I'll just change it to an A, just to signify it's us as women. Estamos unidas," and so like we are united, we are connected, is what it translates to. And so this has been a drop-in format. It's every week, offered every quarter, so fall, winter, and spring. I have my regular attendees. Sometimes they don't come every week. There's a few that just kind of float in and out, but it's their space to talk about any relevant issues when it comes to them feeling like a Latina on campus or however they self-identify, because we sometimes have intersections of identity in the group, and so we want to make sure everyone's feeling included. And so the group is really set up as creating a sense of comunidad, it's a community. And I also use myself as a tool, and so I'm oftentimes on campus because visibility is very important. So when I took this group, just doing a flyer and say come wasn't going to do it. So I had to go visit classrooms where I felt some of my other Latina faculty and staff where they were at. I went to them. I would go to classes even in the evenings to visit some of the classes where they might be, and talked about the group, talked about myself. When I actually talk about the group at the start of every quarter, kind of recruitment time, I tell them if the student wants to meet with me and talk with me ahead of time to kind of get a sense of me, because there's some legitimacy, like who are you and how do you self-identify, what's your story? And so I have to be comfortable with talking about myself. And so in the group, I am sharing those aspects of myself. A lot of them are probably applying to grad school, some of them going out in the community once they graduate, but they want to know how to navigate their own identities and searching for role models. And so we try to create kind of a sisterhood in that group. So oftentimes I am that tool in sharing that space with them. And so that's the reason why we set it up. It's a drop-in, it's every week. The 90-minute traditional 90-minute session. And the extra touch that I do for this group is because it's drop-in, because that's the thing that can happen. You don't know who you're going to get. I always send a reminder, usually the day before, if I can, depending on when my group runs. So like on a Monday, because this historically has been a Tuesday afternoon group. I'll send a reminder email to the ones that have been regularly attending and then say, hey, feel free to bring any of your hermanas, your sisters, if they want to come. However, give me a heads up who might be coming so I can have enough chairs, because you don't know what space you might need. Sometimes I got surprised and there was like 15. I was like, oh no. And then there's some that was like 5, So I would say the average is probably between 6 and 8 on a weekly basis. So it's a little bit about the group.
All right. Again, if you were at the roundtable for talking about peer programs, you've already heard a little bit about my LGBTQ mentoring program. I want to add that all of these programs that we're talking about, we make concerted efforts to have very diverse groups serving as our peer educators, our coaches, our LGBTQ mentors, because it's so important to have, just like our own staff, we try to represent kind of a broad swipe of the demographics that we see on campus, so that students, I know that I've had clients that have participated in either Coach or Latinos Unidas, and they get that kind of mentoring that they need from within their cultural paradigm, which is so very important. And so with my LGBTQ mentoring program, while the focus is on, helping people with their gender identity, their sexual orientation identity, and helping them kind of navigate whatever questioning they have around that. And the mentoring goes all the way from somebody who may be questioning their identity kind of developmentally to folks that are quite comfortable with their identity, but they're thinking about, I want to apply for this internship, or I want to apply for medical school, and all of the activities that I have in my resume are very queer oriented, and so what's that going to be like for me? So getting maybe some professional mentoring. So there's a whole broad spectrum of mentoring that we provide, and ultimately, we're not in this to get free toasters or anything like that. We're not out there to convert folks and bring folks into the fold. We're there to help students be comfortable with who they are wherever they're at. And so I do quite a lot of training. Unique to my program, my mentors are not only students, so I have undergraduate students and graduate students that serve as mentors. I also have staff and faculty that serve as mentors. Right? Currently, the only faculty member that I have is research faculty, so he doesn't interact with students in the classroom, so he has a different kind of relationship. But the vast majority of my mentors are graduate students and staff members. So they're at that place developmentally with their own identity where they feel secure and kind of providing that support to somebody else, navigating that. Although I've had sophomores, juniors, seniors, I've had the whole spectrum. And this is nice because I'm able to do, Jessica already talked a little bit about matching. We work very hard at matching in my mentoring program as well. So my mentors get training on many, many facets of LGBTQ identity and the overlaps of those identities with other identities, the issues that might be common to those groups of folks, also recognizing mental health issues or academic issues or any other thing that's outside the scope of what the service they're providing would be. And like Jessica, I'm available to my mentors. They have my cell phone. They can page me if they're worried about a student and it's after hours. They have access to me. But what's so important about this program is that one-on-one relationship and the match between the mentor and the mentee. We have a lot of mentees whose largest struggle around their sexual orientation or gender identity development is some sort of conflict between the intersections of their identity, whether it be their religious spiritual identity, whether it be their cultural identity and their sexual orientation or gender identity. So it's so important for me to be able to have a broad group of mentors that can help them navigate how those intersections work. We're not coming from that old paradigm, which is very white, Western, you need to be out and proud, and if your parents aren't comfortable with it, you need to ram it down their throat until they are, and if they never are, then you need to be prepared to leave and pick a family of choice. We're away from that paradigm, and we're more into how can we help you negotiate your multiple identities so that you can still be comfortable and value your cultural identity, you can still be comfortable and value your spiritual identity as well as this other piece of your identity. So more of an integration of those identities and realizing that you might need to do some, I like to steal from Kamea Shorter-Goodin. She wrote that shifting, talking about African American women and the shifting that they do in their lives. I like to steal that idea because I think that queer folks do a lot of shifting. They're more out in some circles than others, or they have to behave in certain ways in some places rather than other places. So some of what we're working on is helping them in how to negotiate that and how to work around that. So my mentors do not, yes?
How do you approach the screening and assessment process for students to enable matching with mentors?
So I know my mentors very well. So again, we have one of our pre-doctoral interns is assigned to this program. And people who have run this program in the past, prior to me coming to UCI, have had the requirement that that person be a part of the community. I do not have that requirement. I do have that requirement for our mentors. So our mentors have to be a part of the queer community. But I don't feel that that's necessary for our trainee because our trainee is interacting with the mentors, not the mentees so much. So the mentors have application. that they submit to me that requires 2 references. So I'm hearing from references for the mentors. And then there's an interview, like a job application interview, where I ask them all kinds of questions about their own experiences. We do scenarios. The interview includes, 3 or 4 scenarios about, well, what if your mentee developed a crush on you? How would you manage that? Or what if you developed feelings for your mentee? Or, all different kinds of scenarios that we run through. So I get a sense of kind of how they think on their feet, how they feel about certain things. And then we have extensive training, and that training, a lot of that is kind of your own soul searching and sharing bits of your own identity, and there's a lot of bonding and a lot of learning about each other. I look at my mentors as a team. So, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but so when the match meeting happens, when the mentee meets the mentor, one of the things that I talk about is this is your mentor, but this mentor of yours is not standing alone. You may only be meeting with that person, but they have an entire team behind them that is supporting them. So if you have questions, concerns about anything, there's going to be somebody else on the team that's going to be able to either help your mentor or step in and meet with you with your mentor to provide you whatever support or help that you need. So that's how I screen mentors. Mentees, a lot of my mentees are referrals from colleagues. So students find their way to the counseling center thinking that they need therapy, when in fact they don't really need therapy because they're, facing issues around identity exploration or development. And so a better fit is the mentoring program. Sometimes it's an adjunctive treatment. So maybe they're experiencing some sort of stressors in their life related to their identity, and so they're getting that kind of intensive therapy around how to manage the anxiety or the depression or the other clinical symptoms that's bringing about, and then they have a mentor that's helping them with the other piece of it. What's unique about the mentoring program is that these one-on-one relationships aren't restricted to the counseling center. So I really see my mentors as a bridge between me as a professional and a friend. So these people, the mentee can trust that this person isn't going to exploit them sexually. There's not going to be any drugs. There's not going to be any alcohol. It's a place where you can ask any question. You can ask about sexual practices and things like that and not have to worry about, are they going to think I'm hitting on them because I'm asking them about, how to date or, sexual practices or something like that. So, and the caveat I have with my mentors is, Starbucks might not be the best place to meet because we can't guarantee any kind of confidentiality, and it's hard for us to even talk about privacy when you're meeting in a crowded place. So, find a quiet place to go and have these conversations. But then they're also able to do things that I, as a therapist, can't do. I can't go to an Irvine Queers meeting with a client because they're afraid to go by themselves. I can't walk a client over to the counseling center and, look at the books and look at the movies and, talk to the other students there as a therapist because that's kind of outside the bounds of what I do. I can't take a mentee to a movie off campus or a client. I can't go to Orange County Pride. And my mentors can do all of these kinds of things. They can serve as a bridge to the community as well. And that's very important because unlike most other minority groups, these are folks that aren't born into and come of age in a group that reflects their identity, right? So most African American students grow up in a family that's African American or even a community that's African American, and so you kind of learn the ropes through that built-in support system. These folks grow up most of the time in isolation, and we're getting more and more representation in the world. Certainly it's very different than when I was young. But still, it's difficult. It's difficult to find positive role models. It's difficult to find, where to get corrective information, because there's a lot of bad information out there. There's a lot of Donald Trump. Oh, did I say that out loud? Yeah, so just in terms of utilization, for whatever reason, I don't have these crazy numbers that other folks have. So I have about 17 mentors. Sometimes I have mentors that go inactive. Another thing that's unique about my program is the peer program and the coach program are kind of new batch every year of peer educators and coaches, with the exception of the TAs and the peer coords. They're usually, somebody who was just a peer or a coach the year before. With my mentors, if you train as a mentor, you can be a mentor as long as you're on campus, as long as you have time to do that. So sometimes I might have a grad student who's been a mentor for a couple of years that says, I'm doing my qualifying exams this spring, so I'd like to take a break. But I don't want to quit the program. I just need to take a break because I'm not going to have the time to work with a mentee. And so sometimes I have mentors that go inactive, or I have a mentor that studies abroad. Right, so they go inactive while they're studying abroad. I had a mentor last year who was studying abroad. So instead of him leaving the program, he just went inactive. So that's a great thing that I have, because then I have longevity, I have overlap, and when I have training, everybody's not new. You have mentors that have been doing this to lean on. We have group supervision every other week. And myself and the intern participate in that group supervision, and we provide individual supervision on an as-needed basis. If a mentor is struggling with an issue with a particular mentee, they can get some individual supervision. But so the number of mentees varies widely. There's no rhyme or reason to this. It's also interesting in that sometimes I'll get an application, and then I'll reach out to the person and they'll fall off the face of the earth. Sometimes somebody will get matched with a mentor and then fall off the face of the earth and then come back a year later when they're really ready to do it, because there's oftentimes a lot of anxiety around this. And so I have to be patient and just kind of know that person's out there, and I might reach out to them every couple quarters. Hey, I just wanted to check in, wondered if your schedule freed up, and you'd be, no shaming. We're still here. If you're interested, just let me know. We get people through the resource center as mentees, people that are kind of brave enough to wander in there first, or folks that are new to campus. Lots of international students come to the mentoring program. So I too have mentors that are bilingual. I have a mentor that's a Chinese international student, graduate student. So this is an invaluable resource to be able to help those folks negotiate those cultural issues as well. You can see our numbers, and I'm sure that these are undershots because my mentors are not as good at their documentation, I'm imagining, as the coaches. I use SurveyMonkey for the documentation, and it's not a lot of individual information that they're providing to me. They're providing more kind of specific demographics. So what were the topics that were discussed? Where did this take place? Did you go to an event? Did you meet one-on-one? Did you meet? Sometimes mentors will take their mentees. The four will go do an activity together, because a part of this is community building and helping people make community. We're not a dating service, but community building. So that's the mentoring program. As a part of this, I have a really strong relationship with our LGBT Resource Center, and typically the intern that is with my program also serves as the counseling center liaison to our LGBT Resource Center. So we have a very symbiotic relationship between those two programs, but very important to provide this support to this community, because most of the mentees that come to us are persons of color. They, for whatever reason, the white folks tend to get their support in other places, but those students of color are flocking to us for this type of support. So, super important.
I want to talk about one other outreach program before we kind of summarize here, and that's our International Student Coffee Hour that we host at the Counseling Center. And this is another example of an outreach program that is strongly connected to a liaison relationship that the Counseling Center has. So research shows that social support and language proficiency is associated with better mental health outcomes for international students. And so in the year 2000, we started hosting the International Coffee Hour. It's a weekly informal gathering space for international students in terms of how we market and promote it. But we all know that in terms of attendance, there are international student and domestic students as well who attend on a regular basis.
This is a rockin' party that happens in our center every Friday. It's loud and they have a great time.
Yeah, Fridays at lunch, our hallway is bustling. We're really creating with the International Coffee Hour an informal space where students can gather. They can connect with each other. They can meet new people. We're serving refreshments. There's Counseling Center staff available there too, but also in a very informal fashion, just joining in the coffee hour. So students, in terms of what kinds of conversations and dialogue is happening during this coffee hour, they're talking about a wide variety of things with each other, their common struggles. It's an opportunity for a lot of students to practice in common English. So a lot of times the referrals to International Coffee Hour, I know for me at least as a clinician, is when a student is telling me, international student is telling me, my session with you is the only place I get to practice English. And that feels like definitely not enough. And so International Coffee Hour becomes another space for them to talk to each other, because a lot of the students there, though they may mainly be international students, are coming from different countries of origin and are speaking to each other in English. But also connecting to other students just generally in terms of gaining social support, but also campus resources. Also because it's an informal gathering, but in the Counseling Center, it allows us to sort of bridge that gap to be in our space while not necessarily accessing our traditional services. So many of the students, because International Coffee Hour is drop-in, are not necessarily Counseling Center clients in terms of in our PNC system, but they're physically in our space very often, and that creates that bridge should that need arise for that student who's been coming to our building for 3 quarters now every Friday anyway, to make an intake when they need one or meet with a counselor when something does come up. Just in terms of utilization, this is for the past academic year, but total, we had 736 total students, unique students, come to the International Coffee Hour that academic year. But you can see there's the ebb and flow throughout the quarters. So really, in summary, I think what was really important for us in some of the roundtables that I was in, I think this idea of that push and pull between traditional clinical services and everything else we do, and how do we as Counseling Center staff negotiate that. Part of what I think we're trying to take a little bit more ownership of at UCI is controlling that narrative a little bit more about what is outreach and why is it important, and why is it not just an afterthought or an extra thing we add when we have time or if someone requests something of us, but actually integrated into all of our services in a way that when you look at some of these numbers, if we didn't have coach, if we didn't have the peer educators or the LGBTQ mentors, how many of those students would be making a traditional intake appointment instead, or not accessing any services at all, and what would the impact of that be? UC Irvine's Counseling Center, we are not one of the counseling centers that has the highest utilization rate. And when we think about that and we look at the peer programming and the outreach programming we're doing, for us, we can really frame that in a very positive way, that in times of the year when we don't have a wait list, of course, this speaks more true, if we don't have a wait list and we're servicing all the traditional counseling needs, we can start to sort of feel that maybe some of these programs are meeting the other needs of students so that they're not needing to make intakes. or come into urgent care as frequently as they may have to if the only way to access mental health services or wellness services was traditional counseling. Any questions or comments for us?
We know there's not much time.
Yeah, we've got about 3 minutes.
Those burning questions.
I know a lot of these programs have been around for a long time. Has there ever been any talk of giving these programs to other offices on campus and serving as more consultants, going into the training of the mentors or the peer educators, but not doing the weekly supervision, allowing other staff on campus, through the resource center or other offices on campus to do that work?
I'll quickly speak to the mentoring program. I feel very strongly about a mental health professional overseeing it just because it's an at-risk population. You know, when you look at suicide rates in the LGBTQ community, you know, I just think that supervision is very important, and that be provided by a mental health professional, whether that be a trainee or a licensed staff. You know, I feel very strongly, and
I would echo
imagine
that because of the intimacy of the work with coaches. Sometimes we know this, right? The student might say, I have this going on academically, and then something else comes up, and then they're going to share it with that peer. I would like to know that a licensed mental health professional is there to consult for, so the uniqueness of coach is like that. So I think it would be hard, let's say in a traditional health education program where there's some other peer programs, I think that would be hard to do. So.
And again, I feel like my time, and I'm sure that my colleagues agree, that our time is well spent because hundreds of students are being served. And yes, it's taking our time, but the amount of time that it's taking of ours, there's no way we would see those hundreds of students.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
Anticipating the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are out there. I've heard that too. I actually was consulting with someone from, it was UCLA that started the GRIT program, and so they were talking about that. Well, gosh, you know, we're going to be in a different department. How would this look for us to supervise this, or given what the staff we do have, what can we do and what can't we do? So it's a real thing. It's a real question to ask. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.